Thank you, Evelyn, for giving me this opportunity to share my work with this group. Thank you for listening to me. I will try to not take so much time, but I would like to share this work because I feel that it's very important work. We are in Africa, and language and education has been a very big issue. So I will start to introducing one of the countries where I have been working for several years, is Tanzania. I have focused my work in Zanzibar lately because they have changed the curriculum. But Tanzania is a unique case in Africa, and that is one of the reasons also that I have had the opportunity to work there through a project, Oslo-based project, LOTASA, Language of Instruction, in Tanzania and South Africa. So the particularity in Tanzania is that they are having a national language, Swahili, which is a trans-border language, in East Africa, in Uganda, Kenya, and also part of Congo. So they have Rwanda, Burundi as well. Thank you. So Tanzania used to be Tanganyika, and we call it mainland, but became Tanzania, the United Republic of Tanzania, after the independence, because they have united with Zanzibar. So the use of African languages started long ago, in the 1885 colonial, at the colonial period until 1962. It came through colonial administration and Christian missionaries. And the promotion of Kiswahili began in the early 30s. The first president of Tanzania, Julius Nyerere, had a vision and wanted to unify that country with a language which was actually not his mother tongue, but decided to choose Swahili because it was a well-developed language. And he had also another vision, is to include indigenous knowledge in the curriculum. And I'm quoting him now: our national songs and dances are once again being learned by our children. Our national languages has been given the importance in our curriculum which it needs and deserves. Changes have been introduced to make our educational system more relevant to our needs. And as I mentioned earlier, the language of instruction in primary school has switched from English to Swahili. So it started in 1967 after the independence. So the importance of Swahili today is a language which is spoken by 99% of the population. So only 5% understand English. The dropouts in Africa are very important. The research shows that millions of school children in Africa are repeating classes, dropping out of school, sitting year after year in schools where they learn nothing more than self-depreciation. And in the case of Tanzania, we call them push-out. So, because most of them do not want to be dropped out, but they fail the exam. So secondary school enrollment still drastically lower than primary school enrollment, and among the lowest in Africa, 6% of the age group for male and 5% for female in 2000. And in 2012, it has been a national tragedy where 60% of the children who completed the 12 years in school has not succeeded. They failed the exam, and Tanzania has decided to emphasize on higher education and created 15 universities. And now we see that 9,620 of those admission will not be taken because so many dropouts happen in Form 4, which is lower secondary school. So the examination results, I'm quoting, said, "We are excited to look at the result, but when we see some results, we want to cry. Pupils understand the ideas but cannot express it because of the language barrier. We speak Kiswahili and know that the idea means something, and the child could have expressed it well in Kiswahili, but English is a problem for them, and we cannot give credits for that. So much potential is lost. And that's one of the realities in the ground that I found out doing my research. So I'm quoting a coordinator of a policy forum, which I have interviewed in 2008, because most of the parents were telling me in schools that they want their children to learn English because they want the children to find a work. So she's telling me, parental aspiration for their children is to get a job, and they think being proficient in English is necessary, but pupils do not read and write English well. They are good at memorization, but are not taught to apply concepts rigorously. So the work prospects is, why do Tanzanians need English to find a job? Are we in the UK? We do know that the language of globalization is English, but why should English determine whether you are qualified or not for a job? Why do we need English to get a job when most do not understand English? That is a minority. Most of Tanzanians does not leave Tanzania. Until when will we be slaves? So those quotations are important because it shows that there is a dilemma. English has a different function, and the parents want their children to learn English because they want them to find work in the country or leave the country and go to the UK or to the United States, but they are the minorities. So there's a professor who told me, we are lucky to have Kiswahili as a national language, but if somebody wants to involve more languages, it is not either or. You can teach English, that is fine, but teach it well, and so then you can talk of democracy. If you can express yourself, it is also a human rights problem. Books in Kiswahili will broaden the base for education, because what I find out is most of the professors and teachers would want to teach in English, but the teachers do not master that language. So they are saying, yes, we want our children to learn English, but learn it well. So Professor Hamisi says, those 17 years are the essential years to learn. Why losing time learning through another language in order to learn the language? Because education is for all. If you talk about democracy, and by opening it to all, then you can claim that you are a democracy. Otherwise, you will ask them to vote for what? Ignorance? Freeing the mind is needed. Because this is a reality. Children could learn in Kiswahili. It would not be a barrier. But they could learn English as a foreign language like we do in most of the other countries outside of Africa. So the myth, go to China and Japan. What are their practices? They use English for information, but then they go through the information in their language. That is how they develop. If we use our language, we will stand to win in the long run. We will see if people are interested in knowledge or in English, because it is a terrible mistake to assume that English is knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's what parents think. When they say, I want my children to learn English because I want them to be smart. Or if they speak English, they will be smart. But we know that many people in the US and the UK can speak English, but we don't know if they are, schooled. I wouldn't use they're not smart. But Marta Koro, who's teaching English, is giving also interesting quotation. She said, give students exposure to quality English by allowing English to be taught by only those who are qualified to teach it. The shift could be done without any fear of losing anything. The two languages compete for the same function, and learners end up as losers.
What does UDS stand for?
University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, that's the biggest university. Thank you. So Professor Milokozi has done a lot of research on why this paradigm shift is an issue. Why are we continuing saying, no, we don't want our children to learn Kiswahili when it's a language well developed? And he shared with me. Many of the officials and politicians who make decisions on educational matters were educated under the colonial system and still retain a colonial hangover regarding the language of education. They tend to see Britain as their model regarding curricula and education generally. Besides, there are too much meddling in our educational and economic affairs by organizations such as the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the UK institutions such as the British Council. They give some financial assistance with conditionality, including demands that the English language must be retained and used in education and other spheres. The World Bank and the IMF often advise our countries in East Africa that it is not cost effective to use Kiswahili, that it's cheaper to use English. But in which cost? And we often argue that to have an education cost effective and children learning nothing is not really what policymakers should aim for. And that's what is happening with 60% dropout in low secondary school. So Zanzibar has changed the new curriculum, and that has been my interest for the last year, and I have worked on my doctorate because I find this language in education interesting. Why is this dilemma? And why is Zanzibar changing the curriculum? So Zanzibar has an autonomous, is autonomous when it comes to curriculum, and they have also the Ministry of Education in Stone Town. So they have taken the decision and they have changed the language of instruction, or they will, from 2014. So I look at the implementation of the curriculum, and they will reduce the primary school. They will continue teaching Arabic in primary to standard 3, and they will split those 3 subjects, geography, civics, and history, teach geography in English. They will introduce ICT from standard 5, teaching in English, and they will change the language of instruction. So my research question has been, how has the change of curriculum been prepared and implemented? Have teachers participated in the implementation design, and are they well prepared for the transition to English as a language of instruction? How does this change to a non-local language of instruction relate to debates on children's rights in education? So I have done my work in 4 schools, 2 in Stone Town, urban, and 2 in rural, 1 in the north and 1 in the south. I have interviewed government officials at the Ministry of Education and Vocational Training, principals of each school, 4 teachers in the subjects of Kiswahili, English, mathematics, and science, and lecturers and researchers at the SUZA, the State University of Zanzibar, and the teacher trainers at the teacher of training college. And I have done a document analysis on the documents which are behind the change.
So
yes?
they do not study Kiswahili in Zanzibar?
They have changed the curriculum in primary school, and now they are going back from Kiswahili to English. Because as mainland, they had in primary school they were using Kiswahili, but not in secondary school. But now Zanzibar is going back to introduce English as a language of instruction in mathematics and science.
All the students learn Arabic, but they don't study Kiswahili.
No, they learn Arabic as a subject, as a foreign language. So Arabic as a foreign language, English as a foreign language, and Kiswahili as a language of instruction in primary school. And then in secondary school, they switch the language of instruction.
Zanzibar?
Yeah, in Zanzibar. Mm-hmm. They have emphasized English, because, Arabic, because in Zanzibar they are Muslim, and they have been also occupied by the Ottoman, so the Arab countries. So they have an Arab culture. I mean, they are Kiswahili. Kiswahili is their language, is their culture. Swahili is their culture, but they have influence in Arabic. But also they've been colonized by the British, so they also have the English influence. So this change is, in a way, local and global. They try to maintain their identity and preserve Kiswahili in primary school, but at the same time they want to bring Arabic, which is part of the culture, and then the global, which is English.
Can I ask a quick question? Did you interview students, scholars?
Not in Zanzibar, because they couldn't speak English. This book, I did it only in mainland. No.
Okay.
So the local arguments for English is the language of globalization is English. They do not want to be isolated from the world. Parents want their children to learn English because English will give opportunities to find work. It will be too costly to change the secondary syllabus from English to Kiswahili and train all the teachers in Kiswahili. So some of the arguments in Zanzibar were very similar to the arguments in mainland. And the counter argument for Swahili is, why do we need English to find a job in a country where only 5% of the people speak that language? But in Zanzibar, it's 99.9% who speak Swahili. I mean, everyone speaks Swahili. It's their mother tongue. If we use our language, we will stand to win. It's a terrible mistake. So it was very similar argument that in mainland. So my findings on learning challenges is there were not enough teaching training, very short, 2 weeks per year, only once. It's very short to teach, to switch from a language to another. No books. One book is shared by 10 students, said the Ministry of Education. I named that from The Guardian because I was thinking it's interesting that the ministry now is also aware and say we have to provide more books in school. Too many subjects, too many students, between 50 and 80. One class in Stone Town had 130 students in primary school. No transport, no food, relevant school materials are inadequate, no libraries in rural schools. In one school, I saw a library and I asked if I could see which kind of books they had. We were looking for the key and I waited 1 hour. And after 1 hour, they find the key and they opened, no books. And I said, is it the library? Oh, but we don't have books. So that's really an issue. The findings of language of instruction is the majority of the teachers do not know how to speak English well enough to teach the student in that language. While I was interviewing the English teachers, they could not answer. They were asking me for a translator, and they were English teachers. The majority of the students do not understand what the teacher says when he uses English, which is not spoken outside the classroom. I have interviewed students in mainland. They could not speak with me. So, and very often I use a translator. But of course in primary school, English is not a language of instruction. So they would say my name is, I'm 9 years old. They would know little sentences, but they could not communicate. No. The classroom interchange is dynamic when the language is localized and understood by the students. So the conclusions on the changes in Zanzibar is those changes will not increase quality learning as teachers are not competent to teach in English. They will have a negative effect in the children's cultural identity because those children are taught in a language which is not theirs, and we are telling them that the language is not good enough to be taught. And confidence, as they are taught that the language is not good enough to develop themselves. So it's a big identity issue. They will have a negative effect in the teacher's confidence since the teachers are confused about the curriculum content and they do not master the language they are teaching in. One of my colleagues from mainland has done a study and found out that the teachers were bringing these issues very often. They were losing confidence when they were teaching in a language that they do not master, which is absolutely normal. Yes.
Yeah, that was my question. How do the teachers see their own situation?
They are saying, and Moshi Kimizi has done a doctorate on the confidence of the teacher. They feel that they're really losing their confidence because they do not master. So very often they write on the board, and it's more memorization because they can't communicate. So the conclusions, the curriculum and language of instruction should be local to achieve quality learning, to satisfy the requirements of writing education. The optimal teaching learning environment should be taken into consideration to maximize the performance of children and teachers and to maintain their confidence. English should be taught as a foreign language, since English is a foreign language in Zanzibar and not used outside classrooms. It is absolutely not used outside classrooms. So it is a foreign language. So the recommendation, policymakers and planners should take school realities into account, including the teachers, for further implementation on the school reforms, because what is happening now, implementation is not going to happen. They can't do it. Learn from other countries which change the language of instruction to English. I have done a comparative study with Malaysia, which went through a very similar process. They switched from the language of instruction, Bahasa Malay, to English, and they find out that it didn't work. The results were so poor that in 2010 they went back to Bahasa Malay. They were competing actually with Singapore. That was the idea. And I include children in India because I recently was in India where I have seen that some schools were having children's how do you call that? The children union. Children union. So children could say what they want, and I find it very fascinating. I feel that studying secondary school in Kiswahili could be something also interesting to see the results. And further research on the relationship between language of instruction, dropout, and policy to bring them back to school, because a lot of those children who are pushed out end up as street children. And this is the jacket that they wear when they speak English. So it's Kiswahili. And one of my interviews said, how long will it take us to understand that we are not British? And this is very sad, because when I asked in mainland, I interviewed the student, and I asked her, but why do you speak Kiswahili? And you know what she said? Because it's my language, madam. And of course, it makes sense, it's her language. So, and that's how they get punished. And when you wear that, it is very humiliating. So thank you very much.
Perhaps in secondary school, when they